So oftentimes even conservatives don't want to talk about, well, the red flags that are almost always, I won't even say oftentimes, are almost always evident in these killers. So let's talk about some of them. So oftentimes, most times, these killers have a history of mental health. We just talked about this killer's his mental health history here. And this is true. This is true in most violent events, in most mass casualty atrocities. In fact, Kyle Becker tweeted, he said, over 40 years, the statistics show guns don't cause mass shootings, but mental illness does. The overwhelming number of mass shooters had prior mental health issues. In a nation of 393 million guns, 99.999% are not used for mass shootings. He says, stop blaming law-abiding gun owners. And he posts a graphic here showing that mass shootings in the United States between 1982 and May of 2022, by presence of prior signs of shooters' mental health issues, that 63% had prior signs of mental health problems. 63% of them did. And in an additional 24, it was just unclear. 63%. So this is a huge determining factor. And yet we're told that we shouldn't focus on that, or that it's just a cop-out. It's a whataboutism, the left tells us. We don't want to put a stigma on people with mental health issues, which we're not doing. We're just identifying that people with mental health issues who show signs of aggression or domestic violence are much more likely to commit these heinous acts. So mental health issue is one. There's also a pattern of, and I don't know about this individual. I hope we find out this information, but there's a pattern of these killers being on black box drugs, usually on SSRIs, that these black box drugs that tell you that they address whether it's schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, sometimes depression, maybe anxiety. If you read the black box label on these drugs, they have, suicidal ideation, homicidal ideation as the side effects. Sometimes, not always, sometimes. And we can't ignore that. We can't ignore that the side effect of some of these drugs is a mental disorder that gives you an inclination to want to commit a heinous act like this. A lot of these killers are also really into violent video games. That's the case with this killer. He was known to play Call of Duty. Which simulates the gruesome murder, the gruesome death of individuals. You sit there, you're a shooter, and that's what the game is. We can't ignore the studies that show that when you're this obsessed with video games, it especially ones that simulate you as the killer, that this carries over into your mental health. It carries over into your behavior towards other people. There are studies that show that violent video games actually make people more violent in their personal life, more likely to commit violent crimes. We can't ignore that. It might not be the only trigger for someone to go on a psychotic rampage. But when you have this totality of evidence, these totality of factors that when you add them together, make someone more likely to commit this, why would we as a society ignore this? Because it's unpopular to say, because it might hurt someone's feelings, because you like Call of Duty or someone who's on a black box drug. I'm not sitting here and making an allegation that everyone who takes part in one or more of these behaviors or activities is going to be a mass shooter. But you have this pattern where these shooters, these mass shooters, these killers, they usually are associated with the majority of these factors. There's also the isolation factor. The majority of these shooters are isolated in some way. They're socially isolated. The Buffalo shooter was a COVID paranoid. He was locked down for 2 years. He didn't go to school. He didn't see anybody. This guy was antisocial. He stopped going to school. He was quiet. He didn't talk to anybody. He had very few friends. This isolation, the lack of God. We see a lack of belief in God, a lack of that faith community, and the personal belief that other people have dignity. I don't know what this guy's religious views were, but I'm interested to know. We also see a pattern of messed up family life, of fatherlessness, of parents who are divorced, of parents who aren't involved, who don't supervise their children, who don't train them up with good morals, who are so distant or so absent that they don't notice the red flags themselves, the signs that their child needs help. This shooter not only was violent towards his mother sent him to his grandmother. This is a broken family. He came from a broken family. And then the final piece of this is these children. He was 18 years old, yes, but this didn't happen overnight. Children and teenagers have unrestricted access to poison online, violent poison, racist poison, whatever it may be, pornography, video games. Without any supervision, these children, as they're in their formative years, are exposed to noxious content, to content that assaults the dignity of other people, content that indoctrinates them. And when you take this totality of factors, I don't understand why this is so taboo, why this is such a no-no for us to talk about, because almost every single one of these shooters, you go down this checklist and they check off the majority of these things. So if we want to identify these people before they commit acts and get them help so that we can protect our children, then we have to not just talk about public policy. We can't just talk about hardening schools. Hardening schools is good. We should do that. We have to talk about these individual risk factors and what we, not the government, what we as a culture can do to prevent these things from happening. Because if you'll notice, the majority of the things that I just listed, online internet access, family life, religion, isolation, video games, mental health, and the drugs that they're on, those aren't all things that the government is involved in or should be involved in. Those are things that parents should be involved in. Those are things the family should be involved in. It's not possible to substitute government for the family, and it's a very anti-conservative position to suggest that government has to be the answer to this, and that the answer doesn't lie in our own cultural structure and the assault that we have sustained on family life, on marriage, on gender, on relationships, on the institutions that serve as a bulwark against these vulnerable youth being corrupted by evil. Evil is trying to corrupt our youth.